Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. This is getting good because now we're getting ready to move into the power of the mind. That's a perfect segue. So we can move into the power of the mind because the mind has to be committed. The mind has to have an understanding in order to live inside out effectively. Okay? So let's go to Matthew, back to Matthew chapter 22 this time. Matthew chapter 22, and we'll look at verse 37. And I don't have my pages tabbed, so it's taking me a little longer, but that's okay. Hopefully, you all are being patient with me. Hopefully, you're beating me there. All right. Matthew chapter 22, and let's scroll down to verse 37. All right. And this is where they were asking the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Well, let's just read it. I'll start at verse 34, actually, so we can kind of get what's going on. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, and this is verse 37, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. The greatest commandment. And what does God mention? The mind. The mind is so important. In order for us to even carry out the greatest commandment, we have to have a mind that's committed to and focused on Christ. Because you can't do what you don't know. The mind is so important. And let's get back to our everyday life. If you think about our everyday life, there's a certain amount of brain science that's integrated into our everyday life. Because when somebody wants to get an action or a reaction from you, what do they target? They target the mind. They target the mind. If you think about it, educators, okay? Educators work with brain-based learning strategies. That's what they do. You know, nutritionists, they examine the brain development as a result of diet. You know, they look at diet to see how that has an effect on brain development. When you think about psychiatrists, you know, they prescribe drugs that restore brain chemicals so that you can be able to do something. You know, marital counselors, they have to study the neurobiology of love. You know, when you think about manufacturers, they look at how the brain responds to pleasure when you're consuming their products. So brain science is interwoven into our everyday life because people know the power of the mind. You see, the reason for me teaching this lesson, living inside out, is because it's not easy. That's why I'm teaching it. It's not easy to live inside out, but it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it to live a life rooted in Christ. But it's not easy when everything else suggests otherwise. But it's worth it. It's worth it. You see, our minds, they're inundated with so much on an everyday basis that it's not actually until we try to follow our hearts and try to follow, you know, a passion for God that we actually see the effect that society and all of the external factors has had on our mind. And you know how you can tell? Is with this right here. When you're trying to pursue what you believe God is calling you to do, sometimes you have, or sometimes the heart has a matter that the mind can't fathom. You want to do something, but it just doesn't logically make sense. What is somebody going to think? That's not what we do as a society. That's not considered a right choice. That's considered going backwards in life, or that's considered doing this, or that's considered doing that. Who gave you those ideas? But that's how we can tell the effect that society has on the mind. It's when we actually try to follow the heart and we see that there's confusion within a body that's supposed to be on one accord. And so it makes life very difficult for us because there's a fight within. You see, very rarely, and this is sad, but it's true, but very rarely do desires actually lead to actions. Sad, but it's true. There are all types of barriers that disrupt the continuity between desires to actions. And see, living inside out, that's an understanding that your life, that your worth, that your potential is inside of you. But you have to dwell and you have to know that truth. You have to know it. And you have to be confident enough to live according to what you know. When you know that you have a hold to the truth, then be confident in that. Especially, you see, because when you have those desires to be something greater and to be in a better state of where you are, you know, that's evidence of the greatness that's what's inside of you. When those desires are actually rooted in God and purpose through God, then that's actually an indication of your identity. Okay? Let's go to 1 Peter now. All right, let's go to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter should be right after James. James. And then Peter. All right. Yep. So let's look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. I'm sorry. Chapter 1, verse 13. It says, therefore, prepare your minds for action. Need I go any further? Prepare your minds for action. You can't do what you don't know. The mind is so important. And these are just passages that show how significant it is to have a mind focused, committed to, and an informed mind so that you can act accordingly. That's what it is. You cannot make informed decisions with an uninformed mind. Prepare your minds for action. You ever heard of the saying, you reap what you sow? Well, you ever heard of, and I'll go ahead and write this. I'm going to take down the identity tree. Hopefully I don't need it again. I don't want to draw it again. It won't turn out that good. But you ever heard of the saying, you reap what you sow? Okay? Well, what about this? You sow a thought, you reap an action. You sow an action, you reap a habit. Okay? Well, you sow a habit, eventually you reap a character. You sow a character, you reap a destiny. Eventually, you become the product of your thoughts. The mind is so important.